Dow is over $50,000. I don't know why you're laughing. You're a great stock trader, as I hear, Raskin. The Dow is over 50,000 right now. The S&P at almost 7,000. And the NASDAQ smashing records. Americans' 401ks and retirement savings are booming. That's what we should be talking about. We should be talking about making Americans safe. We should be talking about, what does the Dow have to do with anything? That's what they just asked. Are you kidding?
Mr. Jordan, Mr. Jordan, committee will be in order. Mr. Jordan, am I going to get an extra 45 seconds added to my time?
The committee will be in order. The time belongs to the gentleman from Texas. Ms. Blondie, the Attorney General can respond.
Thank you. The Dow has shattered 50,000 for the first time. This is crazy. They said it couldn't be done in 4 years, yet President Trump has done it in 1 year.
So that's Pam Bondi. You guys know that. You probably saw that clip. That's her talking about, obviously, the most important thing in front of the Department of Justice as Epstein victims sit in the room, as we talk about unleashed mass agents, the streets of America, as we talk about massive corruption. No, but the Dow is up. The insanity you see is class. I wanted to show you that up the front because it relates to we're going to talk about the rest this way. That's the person who's in charge of our justice system. That's the lady who's in charge of the top prosecutor in America. And she tried a thing, and look at the disrespect too. I want to highlight that because it's something I talk about a lot in my other job. What you should be happy, Raskin. If you could imagine, if I could imagine a time in our lives as Americans where that's the way an appointed official, a Senate confirmed official of the United States government treated the oversight of their job. That is where we're at with the insanity and the loss of power of the United States Congress ceding their authority. You see Jordan, after all the screaming, what did Jordan do in his lack of a jacket? He handed it back to Pam Bondi. They're not even pretending to be in charge of anything. And that takes us to what I want to talk a little bit about here at the beginning too. And it's kind of weird, but it's tariffs. Let's talk about tariffs, because as you guys woke up this morning, you probably saw the jobs numbers out. You probably saw Scott Bessent on TV saying how everything is awesome. And, oh man, the tariffs are working. Trump wants you to believe the tariffs are working. Look, this is Trump this week talking about his tariffs.
It's because of tariffs. So we're doing numbers that nobody thought were possible. The economy is rich. I told the story that in Saudi Arabia, the king said, sir, a year and a half ago, we were all saying you're a dead country, and now you have the hottest country anywhere in the world.
Guys, good news. The king of Saudi Arabia thinks we're hot right now. Trump's boss, the guy who pays him and his family, right? So, because tariffs have made us hot. And the truth about tariffs is far from that. And it's a very complex subject, but it's not doing well for us. And it's hard to explain to people. And so I want to talk a little bit about it because you're being lied to. You saw the CPI came out today. Oh, everything is great. Inflation's flattening. Everything's being better. Everything is great. But here's actually what an expert said about this. And it's a little complex, but listen carefully when they tell you how great inflation is going.
This argument that inflation has not spiked as much as some economists had predicted because of the tariffs. There are places where prices have not gone up quite as badly as many had thought. What do you make of that?
I think the inflation question is unfortunately a really big distraction because tariffs can go up and costs can go up without inflation going up. If you think of tariffs as a relative price increase, that's what happens. You might have to pay more for shoes if a tariff is applied to shoes, and that means you have less money to pay elsewhere. So headline inflation may not change much, but your burden went up because the costs that you personally face for goods that have tariffs imposed on them has risen. We've seen partial pass-through to consumer prices in the data, but even if tariffs don't fully pass through to consumer prices, that doesn't mean the burden is gone. That means it becomes a hidden tax burden. Businesses have higher costs, and they deal with that by reducing wage increases or slowing down on hiring. So at the end of the day, whether it's through consumer price increases or a hidden tax increase that hurts the labor market, it's really Americans who are paying this tax increase.
Doesn't just have to show up in the price you pay at the store. It can also be in how much money you take home in your paycheck, what your cost of living.
See, that's the key. It may not show up in inflation. So while the Trump administration and their lackeys are telling us everything is awesome, that inflation is not going up, that manufacturers get ready to boom right around the corner. I got some charts to show you that's wrong. The economists, the experts understand that's not true. Okay. Yeah, sure. Maybe it's not all shoes going up, but your shoes that you just accidentally bought from Italy or bought from China are going up. Your small businesses imports, I don't know, like my daughter's business, they import citric acid. Where's it come from? It comes from Canada, 25% here and there. And that's before we talk about the absolute madness of what Donald Trump is doing. Because since this whole thing is based on a national emergency, using the Economic Emergencies Act, by the way, completely not true, but hey, that's how he's doing this. He took the power of tariffs away from Congress by declaring a national emergency. So now instead of Congress being the overseers of tariffs, the president, instead of Congress handling trade, the president himself at his whim. This is the kind of leadership we're facing right now, and the stability. And I'm going to show you how that plays out. But watch this video. This is Trump this week. You may have seen this one.
So I put on a 30% tariff, which is very low. Still, we were having a big deficit, but it was half the deficit. Then I got an emergency call from, I believe, the Prime Minister of Switzerland, and she was very aggressive, but nice, but very aggressive. Sir, we are a small country. We can't do this. We can't do this. I couldn't get her off the phone. We are a small country. I said, you may be a small country, but we have a $42 billion deficit with you. No, we are a small country. Again and again and again. I couldn't get her off the phone. So it was at 30%. And I didn't really like the way she talked to us. And so instead of giving her a reduction, I raised it to 39%. And then I got inundated by people from Switzerland. And I figured, you know what, we'll do something that's a little bit more palatable, at least now. But I realized that all these, Switzerland you think of as, ultra chic.
He didn't like the way they talked to him. Oh, by the way, fun fact, Switzerland doesn't have a prime minister. They have a president of a confederation. It's a confederation, okay? It's a federated state. This dumbass, who's supposed to be our president, doesn't even know who he's talking to on the phone, and he just jacked up their rates, 39%. But you know who's paying that? Their study now show, as you noticed, 94%, like 84% or 90% of all tariff costs are being passed to U.S. consumers. He's not punishing anyone but the U.S. You own a candy store in Poughkeepsie? Guess what? Your Swiss chocolate just went up because Trump didn't like the attitude of the person who called them, begging him not to screw their economy over. That's not leadership, and that's not how this country is supposed to freaking work. So let's talk the truth about these lies. This is what tariffs are doing to us. Yeah, that is the actual manufacturing construction spending. That's how it's been torched in just 1 year. 1 year of Trump's tariffs, manufacturing is plummeting in the United States. You know why? Because it costs a ton of money for all of those basic things. Steel, wood from Canada, all that's gone up. This is the real truth about the cost of commodities. Yeah, they're going up. And just like that economist said, it's because it's specific sectors. And by the way, if you trust Donald Trump's numbers after firing the statisticians of this government, have I got bad news for you? And I get very angry when I see media companies, and we're going to talk about that, act like it's a real list when they cut out major portions of what is measured typically in inflation just to make it look good. Yeah, gas prices went down because people can't afford to go out anymore. But this is the chart that shocked me this week, you guys. Yeah, that's the jobs. And you say, that goes right back to what Trump just did in that video. Well, I got mad, so I made it 39%. What you're seeing right here, folks, what you're seeing right there is instability. Okay? This is what happens. The chart should be steady up, steady down. But since Donald Trump took office and instigated his Liberation Day tariffs, which got a lot of people rich, by the way, this is the job growth. It's all over the place. That reflects growth, that reflects reporting, firing statisticians. It's all, if you believe these are true numbers, you should also be shocked because it shouldn't look like that. It doesn't take an economist or a rocket scientist, of which I'm neither, to look at that chart and say, oh, that's messed up. And that's what we call for leadership. But here's the big thing. The selling point they're making is that they passed their big billionaire. You're going to see your member of Congress. I've got a member of Congress that I'm very intimate with, if you will, who likes to call it the Middle Class Tax Cut Act. It's not the big billionaire bill, the big beautiful bill. It's the Middle Class Tax Cut Act. And how does tariffs play to that? Well, this lovely chart. Yeah, folks, that's the actual bite that these tariffs are doing to working Americans, average Americans. The red bar is the tariff burden. The average Americans paid $1,000 last year in tariffs. This year, if they hold, it'll be $1,300. So their little billionaire bill that gave the middle class a tax cut is completely wiped out by the fact you're paying more for freaking everything. And where do we go from here? Where do we have this discussion of what we're dealing with? Well, we turn to the media, which is where we're going in this show. I know it's been a journey getting here, but it's such a complex story, and everyone is failing to tell it and understand it in a way that average Americans could do it. I'm an average American, okay? It's hard to understand why they're telling us everything is okay, but the real numbers at my store are much worse. It's hard to understand why we're not getting the truth from our government and people are going with it. Just today it was announced, I think Gallup, for the first time in their history, is going to stop doing the presidential approval poll. Why? And that gets into censorship. That gets into pressure on media. Look, we already know. You just saw what happened in the Washington Post with Jeff Bezos. Look, Jeff Bezos could probably skip a meal and pay for all the staff he just fired at the Washington Post. He could skip a trip he spent $56 million on his wedding in Venice. He could afford to pay for the reporters they just fired at the Washington Post. But that's not the deal, is it? The deal is a controlled media, a controlled information flow is what keeps this democracy, keeps us guessing. And when the truth comes out like this, people are shocked because the truth isn't getting to them. And that's why I'm really excited about having our guest today, because we're going to talk about all of this. What I love when I got pitched for my friends here is junk food news. I don't know, maybe a $56 million wedding in Venice with the Kardashians waving at us as peons is junk food news, not real news. Maybe the clash between rappers and, the Bad Bunny story is really junk food and not the real news, because the real news is that jobs report. The real news is a average American is not actually getting a break from this government, but paying more. So that's where we're going today. I'm thrilled to have you. It's Friday night, Friday the 13th. I've had a great day already. We're just getting started. It's going to be a great night here on Democracy with FP Wellman. I, of course, am Fred Wellman, your hostess with the mostest right here on the Midas Touch Network. I'm excited to have you guys join us tonight live. Got a great guest. As always, great conversations. Let's get on with the show. Yes, welcome. I am still Fred Wellman. 15 seconds ago, I was Fred Wellman. I'm still Fred Wellman. My dogs are barking because I drummed on my desk. Welcome to the show. It's great to have you. Look, there is so much going on, and we rely on the media, or the independent media now more than ever, to tell us that story effectively, and it's gotten harder and harder. But I'm so excited because we've got a great guest today who runs something really cool. So my guest is Mickey Huff. He's the director of Project Censored and is the president of the nonprofit Media Freedom Foundation. Huff joined Ithaca College in 2024 after spending, bring him on in. Actually, he lived in Northern California for an awfully long time. Now he serves as the distinguished director of the Park Center for Independent Media, professor of journalism. And while you're here today, Mickey, it's great to have you, the editor of the new book, The State of the Free Press 2026. Show us the book. It's so great to have you, Mick. We've been trying to get you on for a while, but I couldn't think of better timing. I was looking at the news this week as we prepare for the show, and I thought, oh my God, what a great time to talk about the media. You saw that opening bit. Does that make sense to you? It's like trying to explain tariffs, today, isn't it? It's hard, isn't it?
Well, Fred, it's an honor to be here with you. Thanks so much for the invitation. It's always a good time to talk about the media, because the corporate media never really want to talk about themselves in a way that is self-reflective and critical, a degree to which that they reassess their reporting and who their audiences happen to be. And because if the corporate media did regularly check their own reporting and the things they cover and don't cover, they would likely begin to realize, really see patterns of how many things they leave out. And the things that they leave out, we could chalk up to, there's not enough time, or we're not sure if the audience is interested. But there are also, of course, far more insidious reasons that stories aren't covered or don't get the attention they deserve, and that usually has to do with the political economy of mass media. Who are they offending? Who are they lifting up? Those kinds of things. And so that's why we really need a vibrant independent media, an independent press that reports transparently and ethically in the public interest first and foremost, not on the behest of the advertisers, the owners, the boards of directorates, government agencies, appointees, etc. And so this is Project Censored. This is our 50th year, actually. We were founded in 1976 because, Fred, the problems with media aren't just recent, and they're not just in the last decade with the moral panics around so-called fake news that the Trump administration has weaponized expertly, really blowing up Nixon's attacks on the press, really making Nixon's attacks on the press look almost comical by comparison. But here we are, and I tie into that history in the beginning of this year's book, State of the Free Press 2026. Again, our 50th anniversary edition, edited with my colleagues Shealeigh, Voitl, and Andy Lee Roth. And in it, I really talk about past and present. Past is prologue. We live in a society where we have had a belief that the media will eventually tell us the things we need to know to meaningfully be civically engaged. But that trust in media has been waning and flagging for quite some time. And in fact, in the last decade, we've seen record lows beyond, record lows. We keep getting record lows.
No, it keeps going down. It's just diving. It's kind of
subterranean at this juncture. And that's really not a good thing, because when you see that the public trust in the Fourth Estate is hovering down around the same trust they have in things like Congress, which is also tragic, we have to start asking important questions. Why is that? Is it because the public is simply fooled or uneducated? Is it because they don't understand the complicated issues that are going on, like tariffs, like you said? Perhaps perhaps that's some of the reason. But the other reason why people might not understand complicated issues is because the media don't tell people what's really going on, to paraphrase George Selkes from the mid 20th century. The media's job is to tell the public what's happening. It's not to pretend to be objective. It's not to both sides everything to death. It's not to pretend that facts on one hand are equal to no facts on the other in nature of fairness or balance. It's, again, to report the facts, to show people, shine light in the dark places, and allow the public to understand how the system that allegedly supports them really works and for whom. And that's what we've been doing at Project Censored for 50 years. That's, of course, what I'm doing at the Park Center for Independent Media at Ithaca College with the annual Izzy Award, aimed after muckraker I.F. Stone. This year, coming up in April, is our 18th annual award already. So while the corporate media is bleak and the billionaire press is tanking, they're allowing it to tank. If they can't buy it and own it and control the message, they'll just let it wither on the vine and die. And that's what we're seeing. Jeff Bezos is the one that's turning off the lights over at the Washington Post to have democracy die in darkness. The entire industry is being blackmailed and extorted by the current administration in various ways. We've seen the complete gutting of CBS. Once the seat of people like Edward Murrow and Walter Cronkite, who was friends with Carl Jensen, the founder of Project Censored, by the way. We now see the ideological commentator and hack Bari Weiss at the head of CBS. Their ratings have, of course, tanked. They already weren't great. But that's, again, part of the trend, is to destroy the Fourth Estate, to continue to degrade public trust so that people then sort of flounder around and look for information. And half of Americans already, Fred, get information from social media platforms, and they engage in what's called news snacking, where, the news will eventually find me because my feed is just constantly telling me things. But what people don't see is the black box, the algorithms, the shadow banning, the way in which big tech, winnows, censors, controls, and pushes various forms of information to promote certain narratives and suppress others. And so that's what we've been talking about at the project for a really long time. And in the last 5 years or so, we've certainly spent a lot of time looking at big tech and the control that big tech, 5 companies basically, that control much of the big tech sector. Of course, now with AI and NVIDIA and Palantir, we're into, or we need a new term. Orwellian doesn't cut it anymore.
Yeah, and let me, that's exactly. I mean, we've seen dramatic changes in the media, right? And you're sitting on the Midas Touch Network. We have 5.8 million subscribers on YouTube, some ridiculous number. I mean, I think when I started on Midas Touch, it was 1.6 million. We all thought that's crazy. And now we're here at 5.8, you know, which, by the way, good Lord, I can't believe I'm sitting here. But having said that, they let anyone in this network, clearly. Having said that, you know, so you're seeing a rise of truly an independent media of a sort. Obviously, I'm an opinion guy. I have strong opinions. I don't hide those opinions. I mean, I think you're sitting in a time, as you wrote this book, the 50th anniversary of the center, that we are in a very, very serious time of change in the industry, right? Is there a comparison in history, you think, Mickey, where you've seen such the rise of people like me, of all people, some dude from Missouri, you know, but has a voice? I mean, hey, look, 100,000 people a week or 200,000 a week seeing me jibber jabber. That's some serious numbers for even a regular media outlet, right?
It's incredible, Fred, that what those technologies have allowed us to do is that they have allowed us to hear different voices, more voices. And in theory, it has certainly allowed people the opportunity not only to speak, but be heard, and to say things and to have narratives get through and cut through the noise that we don't hear in the so-called mainstream or establishment press. However, it's also completely increased the noise. And so it's harder and harder to find those voices and then establish the trust that the Fourth Estate assumed until it began to really lose that public trust and began to even contribute to its own demise by failing to report accurately in the public interest and hold those in power to account. You mentioned, were there previous eras? And I'm not going to go through the golden era fallacies or put on the rose-colored glasses and have an appeal to antiquity.
I appreciate them. Because I'm old as hell and I know better.
Yeah, exactly. It's never been perfect, man. It's never been perfect. But if we go back 100 years, you know, people like Upton Sinclair really were making a difference, right? People like Lincoln Steffens were really making a difference in the Shame of the City series. And what happened is, if you took the writing of people like Ida Tarbell taking down Standard Oil, Upton Sinclair leading Teddy Roosevelt to pass the first regulatory measures to oversee food safety. I mean, that's really incredible. It was actually Roosevelt's doctor that was privy to Sinclair's work that told Roosevelt, hey, this is a serious issue and we should be looking at this. And it's muckraking journalists like Sinclair that were telling the story. And a lot of the bigger papers at the time weren't really interested in that until they started to realize that the public had an appetite for these kind of stories. And that's when you started to see Steffens and many others in that slogan. It's a so-called golden era of muckraking journalism. However, the way that the corporate media at the time responded to it was through yellow journalism, by throwing anybody who wanted to write salacious stories and try to take each other down. It was like a hip style, right? It was like gotcha journalism on steroids. The problem is that the work that these reporters were doing often took months or years, and they had to produce receipts. And that's how they gained public trust and caused change. These other ephemeral, you know, coattailing people writing in the yellow press, the cheap media, they were making things up, or they were writing salacious tales of gossip and so on, forerunners of what we now call, Carl Jensen coined the term, the founder of Project Censored, coined the term junk food news in 1983 to talk about the problems of what he referred to as news inflation. There's more and more of it, to your point earlier, 5.8 million viewers on the Midas Touch. There's more and more of it news everywhere, but because there's more and more of it, it seems to be less. It seems to be worth less, right? More and more, it's worth less and less. And it's harder to find the quality journalism because, here's the punchline, we live in a society that doesn't teach critical media literacy. We do not teach the public how to critically engage with the Fourth Estate. We do not teach the society how to critically reason, how to form logical arguments, or how to respectfully and civilly disagree with one another and rely on facts and evidence rather than appeals to emotion, fear-mongering, and reliance on confirmation bias. And so you won't be surprised that, you know, I'm an historian by trade, and I teach critical thinking. I teach historiography. When it comes to journalism, I'm interested in the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics. I'm interested in how that applies to storytelling. I'm interested in how that relates to who gets to tell the stories and who doesn't. In addition to like just basic things like fact checking, Andy Lee Roth and Shealeigh Voitl of Project Censored have also reminded us of frame checking. The media and their Overton window, they frame the things that they want us to hear and see and how we're supposed to talk about it. And if you happen to have a viewpoint or facts that go outside of that window, they simply don't get a fair hearing. And that's not a new phenomenon either. It's just nowadays in an era where we have such consolidation of the media, whether it's corporate media or big tech in Silicon Valley, it's harder and harder to get through. You might be sitting into the microphone. It might look like you have 5 million listeners, but You may or may not. Half the traffic on the internet is bot driven. Right.
Right.
These are the kind of things when we talk about critical media literacy, these are the kind of things about the media landscape that we're talking about that most of the public is wholly unaware, not because they're stupid, but because they're not given the opportunity to learn about it. And there's media literacy, for example, is only a mandated topic of education in 6 states, Fred.
Wow.
This should be mandatory K-12, which is why we wrote the book, The Media and Me, a critical media literacy guide for young people. That's actually been adopted by one of the largest school districts in the country in one of those states. But this is a drop in the bucket compared to what's needed. In order for the public to understand that tariff graph that you showed them, they need to understand a history of where tariffs came from. They need to understand a history of things like protectionism. They need to understand the ramifications and the outcomes of things like the Cold War. Those things aren't yesterday's news. They shape the world we live in today. And since people have also civic and historical illiteracy, we're really kind of like just putting things on top of nothing. Like the foundation is very shallow, and it's very it crumbles very easily because people don't have the fundamental backgrounds and basic skills of critical thought, critical analysis, historical background, and of course, the art of conversation, constructive dialogue, how to speak with people, not over people, and how to build bridges, not walls, Fred. And
all right, let's stop you. That's a great place to transition because I do want to talk about the next piece of that, which is the walls that are going up around us that are hard to break through to. So first, let's take a sponsor break real quick. Got a great sponsor with Shopify, always takes care of us, and then we'll be right back. I started this podcast and my former small businesses. It seemed like I had to figure it out all on my own. I mean, everything from scripts, setup, locations. It was super overwhelming. And every day seemed to introduce a new decision that I needed an answer. When you're starting off with something new, it always seems like your to-do list keeps growing. And every day it's new tasks, new things you got to get done. And it overwhelms your life. And then find that right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything can be such a game changer. And for millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the US. From household names to ones you should, like Sugar and Spruce, to brands that are just getting started. So accelerate your efficiency whether you're uploading new products or you're trying to improve existing ones. Shopify is full of helpful AI tools that help you from product descriptions, headlines, even your photography. And best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing returns and all of it. And the best part, if you get stuck, because let's face it, I'm kind of old, Shopify is always around 24/7 customer support that you can call when you're in a crunch. So start your business today with the industry's best business partner, Shopify, and start hearing. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/Fred. Okay, let's go to shopify.com/Fred. And one more time, that's shopify.com/Fred. Hit them today. Thanks. And we're back. So I was kind of looking to transition because it's about Project Censored, right? It's Project Censored. And I think when it started 50 years ago, censorship looked a certain way, right? And I think here in 2026, you talked about walls before we took our break. The censorship looks different, doesn't it? It looks like Barry Weiss being in charge. It looks like pressure from the White. What I'm saying? So can you take me through a little bit that art that people don't realize they're being censored today, right? So talk to me like, what does censorship at Project Censored look like in 2026?
So that's a fantastic question, Fred, and I appreciate the opportunity. Our definition of censorship hasn't actually changed that much since Carl Jensen founded the project, and Peter Phillips took over 20 years later, and then I became associate director in 2008, director in 2010. Andy Lee Roth came back as associate director right after that. So
pretty big names, man. You got.
Well, we've had a string of consistent coverage about what we talk about censorship, and when we talk about censorship, we don't just mean that the government comes in and blacks out the story. We know that happens because of whistleblowers. We know that happens because of historical counts. We, of course, know that happens because of things like WikiLeaks and Julian Assange and Edward Snowden and Chelsea Manning and John Kiriakou. We can go down the list of whistleblowers, right? Daniel Ellsberg, historically, right? And, the Project Censored was founded in the wake of things like the Pentagon Papers, Watergate, and the Church Committee hearings unveiling, sort of pulling back the curtain of corruption on government, including government collusion with media. And so the definition of censorship at Project Censored has always meant the sort of anything that interferes with the free flow of information in a society that purports to have free press principles is a form of censorship. People need to understand that censorship is a nuanced thing, which is why we also talk about a concept we have called censorship by proxy, which is where major corporations that control the media assets operate in ways where their interests and the interests of government actually align. There doesn't need to be a formal meeting at, the end of an abandoned pier in an empty warehouse with people murmuring in code and trench coats under a light bulb with no
Envelopes of cash. Yeah, no, it's much more subtle.
Well, speaking of envelopes of cash, maybe Tom Holman knows a little bit about that. But
Oh, yes, he does.
moving along from the bags of cash, there's plenty of bags of cash.
I go to Cabo. I don't go to Cabo enough, clearly. We digress.
Yeah, no doubt. Maybe we'll meet one day there.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, censorship is let's go back and just look at this for example. At the time, Walter Cronkite was one of the biggest names in news in the country, and he was trying to report on Watergate around the 72 election. And there were independent media people that were reporting about Watergate in the 72 election. This is before the Washington Post, before Bernstein and Woodward, before all of it broke and led to the resignation of Richard Nixon. And the independent media actually had a role in that. And that's actually what ended up helping start Project Censored, is Carl Jensen was wondering why it took the media so long to see one of the biggest scandals of the century, right? And so that started him thinking about ways in which news media is suppressed or censored. And guess what? There was an actual government interference between the Nixon White House and the president of CBS that actually spiked a significant report that Cronkite wanted to do. And that came out later. But the more important thing from that story is that there were independent people writing about it that didn't have the reach. And it wasn't until the Washington Post really blew up the story. There were only a handful of reporters in Washington, D.C. on that story for the years that it was developing, because the owners of the press were like, oh, well, what is this garden variety corruption? Or what exactly is there to see here? And again, it was like the tip of the iceberg. And by the iceberg, I don't just mean Nixon and some of the petty crimes he had afoot. I'm talking about the major crimes against humanity, 3 million dead in Vietnam, both presidents, both administrations lying through their teeth, as we learned about in the Pentagon Papers, where Nixon tried to stop the Times, the New York Times, and the Supreme Court at that time ruled in favor of the free press and whistleblowers and Daniel Ellsberg. I'm afraid, Fred, that the Supreme Court today likely would not uphold that kind of right of the press, number one. But number two, we seem to lack civil courage in our news media today, where those outlets do not want to report on those kind of specific stories that bring down major people in power, because they are too deeply entrenched with them, right? And that's where I get back to the censorship by proxy. That's where we get back to looking at ownership of all of them. And the one thing that's changed a bit, Fred, I would suggest, is that the absolute brazenness that these people now exhibit. Millionaires Row at the inauguration. Bezos saying, we're not endorsing a president. We're not going to do, we want more neoliberal pro-billionaire stories. And then when they don't produce and their subscriptions tank, he cuts 30% of the workforce.
Right.
This is by design, right?
Yep.
It also creates a chilling effect. And censorship is not just, again, the thing that comes from on high. It doesn't just come laterally from the editorial rooms. It also comes from reporters themselves who fear for their jobs. Right. They see a reporter reporting about something serious that they then get attacked or lose their job. And that's happening in droves now. And just in the last year, we've seen all kinds of episodes of professors being fired, journalists losing their jobs, all for asking questions, all for daring to try to show the facts and speak the truth to power in ways that might embarrass people in powerful positions. And we can't forget that. And this is why we need to support a truly vibrant, free press. Not, again, A.J. Liebling in 1960, a media critic, once wrote, the best way to ensure freedom of the press is to own one. Well, yeah, he was criticizing that, not encouraging people to do it.
Yeah.
But this is where we are now, specifically, is that we're down to a half a dozen companies, whether it's big tech or in the media, that control damn near everything that's going on. People think they have a variety because they have 500 channels, but it's owned by the same 5 or 6 companies that then have subsidiaries and their parent companies of all the other companies that they didn't advertise for and pretend they have. I mean, it's a large incestuous game and an orgy of capital. And as George Carlin once quipped, it's a big club, and Fred, we ain't in it.
No way. And that talks to me. So we talk about, media democracy as a solution, right? And what media democracy. So talk to me about that. When you use the term media democracy as a solution, and what does media democracy in action look like to you today, Mickey? What you've described, and hopefully our people aren't just like depressed as hell now. Sorry, gang. Here we are. Welcome to my world.
There's more.
But wait, there's more. Yeah, you think that's shitty. Wait till I hear the next beat. But seriously, I mean, what does the media democracy as a solution look like? Tell me when you talk about media democracy, walk me through that.
So thanks for the opportunity, Fred. I appreciate that. One of our taglines at the project for years has been the news that doesn't make the news and why. But for a period of time in the 2000s, when Peter Phillips was director, he shifted some of the tagline and the focus to media democracy in action. And what that means is, Maya Shinwar and Laura Witt from the Movement Media Alliance, Truth Out and Prism Reports contributed to the chapter in the book. We have a chapter every year called Media Democracy in Action. And Misha Gerkulas has been editing that chapter for several years for us now, a great media scholar, and she works with us at Project Censored. Maya and Laura wrote, "There's no power for the people without journalism by and for the people." Not the billionaires, right? Not the military-industrial complex, but by and for the people. And the Media Democracy in Action chapter does something that we do at Project Censored that enmeshes the important principles of the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics, also the importance of understanding the role of the free press in society to accurately inform the public so that we be meaningfully civically engaged, but it also focuses on solutions journalism. And so that's the thing that we wanted to get to, is that we don't just call out the problems and get mired in the negative news cycle at Project Censored. Yes, we point out the problems. Yes, we point out what corporate media don't cover. We also applaud the corporate media when they do cover important stories, because it's not all bad. It's not all corrupt and garbage. It's nuanced. The independent media help us see where those things are, and they help us understand where there are important stories that the corporate media might be missing. And Media Democracy in Action focuses on exactly these independent journalists, their outlets, these nonprofits, the people that we think year after year are doing the kind of work that's necessary for the maintenance of a democratic republic. And for example, the Movement Media Alliance is just one example, a consortium of basically 24 independent news organizations that's banding together, helping pool their resources to make sure that independent media doesn't just exist, but that it grows and it thrives, and that the people that care about citizen journalism and advocacy journalism not only have a place, but can make a living trying to make a world a better place. And we think that that is among the most laudable things that can be said about the Fourth Estate and about journalism. And quite frankly, if you go back and look through, some of the towering figures of the 20th century, whether it's, from Lippmann to Seldes or I.F. Stone, the main job was to tell the public what is happening, what do they need to know, connect the dots, help people figure things out. And so this year we include several people in the book. And by the way, your viewers, you can go to projectcensored.org and you can see all of our top censored stories going back to 1976 for free. You can see excerpts of all the book chapters going back to 93, including junk food news, news abuse, propaganda deconstruction. We do a whole deja vu section that historically looks at previously censored stories to see, where are they? Did the corporate media finally pick them up, or do they continue to languish in obscurity? So we show patterns, right? One of the things that makes Project Censored different is that we're an educational organization, right? We're not pundits. We're not 24/7 hot takers. We're 5212. We're in it for the long haul, so people understand these things in the big picture. And one of the parts about solutions that's important, again, is in the Media Democracy for Action chapter. This year, we've got Ryan Grimm from Drop Site News with Jeremy Scahill, consistently reporting amazing information that you're not seeing in the corporate press. We've got Lauren Harper from Freedom of the Press Foundation, the first government secrecy, Dan Ellsberg secrecy chair over at the Freedom of the Press Foundation, and Seth Stern doing absolutely amazing work around press freedom, protecting press freedom. Jody Raves Spotted Bear from Indigenous Media Freedom Alliance, talking about things in the media that you'll never see, on television, about indigenous peoples, on a history of settler colonialism, on how that relates to what's happening in the world today, and why history matters for everyone, not just the dominant class. So, I could go on and on here, Brian, with examples of these groups. But
it doesn't look like on the larger areas like ProPublica and like there is a growth of nonprofit news like Texas Tribune and others. Here in Missouri, we got the Missouri Independent that I very much love. Do you think that's is that nonprofit news a direction that kind of addresses a lot of this? You think, because it separates them from that, right?
I can tell you absolutely it does on a couple of different in a couple of main ways. one, you just mentioned some great organizations.
Yeah.
And there are many, many more. And I urge people to go to our website, projectcensored.org or parkindymedia.org. We have a whole section of independent media outlets and independent media organizations broken down by subject, topic, specificity, area of expertise.
Great.
And that's just the starting point, because sometimes people say, like, what makes media independent, right, versus corporate or for profit? And the nonprofit sector is, and of course, Media Freedom Foundation, we are a nonprofit that oversees Project Censored. And let me tell you, Fred, one of the ways we know that independent media and the nonprofit sector is doing so well is nonprofits have been the direct target of the current administration, including in Congress on H.R. 9495, where they are literally naming names and giving reasons as to why 501c3s should be stripped of their tax-exempt status by decree from the Secretary of the Treasury with no oversight or no appeal. And of course, they were targeting nonprofit groups specifically that were pointing out things that were happening in Gaza. They were, pointing out inconvenient truths. Of course, the entire campaign to wrest control of TikTok from China was coverage of Gaza. That was a direct reason said out loud by members of Congress, former senators. I mean, for 2 years, they said the quiet part out loud. Young people are being radicalized by reporting in Gaza. So instead of addressing why that is a problem, they went and shot the messengers. That's why we've seen record numbers of journalists being killed in places like Gaza.
Right.
That's why the Israeli government won't let reporters into Gaza, where the Israeli government recently finally admitted, the IDF admitted, that the low conservative estimates of dead people in Gaza from the Gaza Health Ministry at 71,000 is, quote, accurate. I mean, that's more Americans than died in Vietnam, Fred. I mean, and yet, if you mention it, you're anti-Semitic. That's another trope and attack. And again, this is how we know that when those attacks get ramped up to fever pitch, Pam Bondi's tantrums, when those attacks go to fever pitch, we know that there's a core truth that they are trying to attack and silence, and they will silence anyone or anything that gets in the way of their authoritarian agenda. And again, as Sinclair Lewis said, when fascism comes to America, it'll be wrapped in the flag and carrying a cross. And here we are.
Yep. That's it right there. Well, I think that's a great place to. So we talked a little bit about it. Where can people find more information about what you guys are doing? And it sounds like you hit it a little bit, but I want to remind everybody that this is so important, and grab the book and everything else.
Fred, you can go to projectcensored.org. You can get all of our information there. You can tune into the weekly Project Censored show, syndicated on 50, 60 stations around the country last few years. We've been on. Ask your bosses, Fred. Eleanor and I would love to join your network. And you can also go to parkindymedia.org to learn about the Park Center for Independent Media at Ithaca College and what I do there with students. Again, students are really a central part of the work that we do, both at Project Censored and the Park Center, to train the next generation of citizen journalists. And we want journalism schools and these kind of programs, to quote Carl Jensen, to churn out more muckrakers and fewer buckrakers.
I love it. I guess that's where I fall at. Well, man, this is Mickey. Man, what a blast! Thanks for coming on. This is such and for those of the show, and the show. This is such a key part of the democracy. It's not just the third branches of government and Trump. It is how we are getting the information about what they're doing, and that's the key. So I really appreciate the information. I know my audience is gonna love hearing from you. The Mighty loves this kind of stuff. All right, so good luck. Stay safe out there. Right, because it's crazy right now. I look forward to talking to you again, Censor.
Thanks, Fred. Pleasure was mine.
Whew, what a great conversation. And this is you guys, I return to the media about every 3 or 4 months, right? Because that is such a key part of this conversation. The show is called On Democracy for a Reason. And you can hear these conversations we're having. And if you don't see it, obviously it's become so much more obvious it was perfect timing to get Mickey on, because we are watching the Washington Post be stripped to the bones. We're watching what was the icons of our media: CBS, New York Times, Washington Post. I mean, I grew up on these myself. It's funny. I'm a West Point cadet. I got the ring and everything, and we had to memorize New York Times top stories every day and recite them back to our leaders. Now I know why, as a 6-year-old, why that was so important. To create some media knowledge and understanding within our future Army officers was so important. Now, who knows you're going to get when you read those stories? Who knows you're going to get when the Washington Post? They're memorizing stories that make it sound okay that Pete Hegseth is doing the insane things he is to DOD, that Doug Collins is stripping VA and dismantling it to privatize it. They think that's okay. So we've got a real fight. So what Mickey's doing with understanding, media, understanding what we're reading and how to cut our way through it. And by the way, what outlets to use. And I can't recommend enough the organization we mentioned. So many great independent media, nonprofit media. So check that all out. In the meantime, here we are. Our independent media is right here on Democracy. My voice is being put out on fpwellman.substack.com. I'd love you to follow us there. Just as you're sitting here right now, just click on over to fpwellman.substack.com. Subscribe for free. You can't beat the price. We're putting out a lot of information about that other project I'm working on right now. A lot of information about that project, because that also is important. We're facing a very critical moment in the United States coming up this year. This is the year. This is the election year. So we can't not be involved. There is no choice anymore. We got here because too many people decided it was too hard to understand. Too many people decided to sit it out. So don't you become one of them. Don't you sit out our democracy. Don't let your kids, your mom, your dad, anybody sit out our democracy in this moment in America. Because if you do, God knows what comes next. Because we're not done yet. We got a lot of fights still in us. I'm going to keep on fighting. You know that if you've been following me for a while. So with that, this is the Midas Touch Network. I am Fred Wellman. Join us here, of course, live every Saturday or Friday night at 7 p.m. Eastern. Keep up the fight, folks. As I said, we're not done yet. Thanks.